All right, folks, so we're actually going to be in 2011 paper. We're actually going to do section D, all right? The last section in 2011 paper, geography paper 2, structured paper, general proficiency. All right, now with respect to section D, question number 8, study table 2, which shows natural disasters for the period of 1947 to 1980, and answer the questions that follow. All right, take a couple of minutes, or take a couple of seconds actually, and look at the table. You have seen natural disasters there for the continental areas. You have seen from North America, Central America, Caribbean, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia. All right. The number of lives lost, number of disaster events, and the average loss of lives per event. All right. Now, which area had the fewest deaths from disasters? Now, folks, if you look at it from the general overview of things, look which area had the fewest number of deaths. You can see simply number of life lost will be for Australia. All right, Australasia to be honest. All right, so one mark. Okay, very quickly. What was the combined total loss of lives for Africa and Asia? All right, loss of lives for Africa and Asia. We can see Africa is in fact 25,540. All right, Asia is in fact 1,054,090. All right, so when you combine both of them, you will actually get 1,079,630. I'll say that again. When you add up both of these values here for Africa and Asia, you will actually get 1,079,630. All right. Okay, let's go through quickly. What is the difference in relationship between the number of disasters and the number of lives lost in Europe and Africa? All right, so the number of disasters, okay, number of disaster events, and the number of lives lost for Europe as well as Africa. Now, folks, from what we can see on the screen, we are simply seeing for Europe, it is in fact 26,694 for 119 disaster events. All right. Whereas for Asia, it's in fact 1,054,090 for 437 events. Okay. So what we can see here is that the difference in the relationship between the number of disasters and the number of lives lost in Europe and Asia. Right? Europe had in fact a lower number of disasters and subsequently a lower number of lives lost than Asia. Asia actually had a higher value, right, in terms of the number of lives lost as well as the number of disaster events. Okay, so pretty straightforward, not a big rocket science there. All right. Okay, so we have those per se. All right. Let's go down quickly into the define the term natural hazard. All right, now students, natural hazard. A natural hazard is in fact a term which highlights a phenomenon, right, that has the probability of inducing negative impacts upon human health and well-being, and is in fact not incurred by human activities. It is in fact a natural phenomenon. All right, part two. B part two. Describe three impacts of any one of the following hazards. Now, students, you have to pick one for the exam, but for the purpose of understanding, we are going to go through all of them. All right. So in this regard, we will ensure that there would not be any cause to repeat these questions in the future. All right. So with respect to earthquakes, right? With respect to earthquakes, what are three major impacts associated with earthquakes? Now, first and foremost, earthquakes can contribute to vibrations of the surface of the land, which can contribute to number one, landslides. All right, because of unsupported slopes, especially associated with steep, unsupported, deforested slopes, landslides can in fact be incurred in those particular areas. Now, for earthquakes, we can also experience what we call uncontrollable fires, especially if the underground gas lines are ruptured. Given you have friction of rocks and even metallic pieces below the in the subsurface regions of the earth, and this can result in fires. All right. We can also have collapse of buildings and damage to infrastructure, as well as loss of lives, both humans and animals. Now, I always want to highlight something very quickly. For earthquakes, volcanoes, and hurricanes, there can in fact be loss of lives, both humans and animals, in all three of them. Okay. So for volcanoes now, all right, in terms of the three impacts, right? Volcanoes can produce a significant amount of atmospheric contaminants or pollutants into the atmosphere, which can simply affect respiratory or the breathing, sorry, of people and even animals as well. For example, in Krakatoa in 1883, its eruption resulted in a lot of particulate matter to simply cover the atmosphere, the sky for hundreds of miles. All right. Also, in recently in Mount Pinatubo in the year 1991, all right, there was in fact an estimated over 250 million tons of particulate matter and actually gases being released into the atmosphere. Secondly, for volcanoes, a second impact is that there is in fact a significant decline in vegetative structure. Obviously, because of lava pervading the area, the lava will simply encompass the vegetative areas, destroying them in the process. All right. Thirdly, volcanoes can produce a lot of ash deposits on the surface of the land, and sometimes there are instantaneous changes in weather patterns, which can contribute to rainfall because of the particulate matter in the atmosphere. That rainwater mixing with the volcanic ash can in fact produce what we call lahars, Lahars, which are also known as mud flows. When the Mount Soufriere erupted in Montserrat. Well, Soufriere erupted in Montserrat rather. Um, there was in fact a lahar or mud flow, an estimated 2 meters in height, which came with great fury down the hill and affected a great area. All right, that's in Montserrat. Now, for hurricanes, right, the three impacts associated with hurricanes, we have to understand that hurricanes can, in fact, because of the gale force winds, can produce storm surges on the coastal environments. This can result in a lot of coastal destruction and potentially even death if people are in close proximity. We also have infrastructural damage, right, both inland as well as coastal regions, not only because of the wave, but because of the gale force winds, like I indicated earlier. We can simply remove property or even objects, right, from one area and transfer them to a distant location. All right. Thirdly, we could also have loss of lives, both humans and animals. All right, and we could also take into consideration there can also be flooding, inland flooding, as well as coastal flooding as well. No, part C. All right. Explain how two activities of a named natural disaster organization in a Caribbean country have contributed to improved response to hazards. Now, students, the named Caribbean Natural Disaster Organization is in fact the ODPM, which is the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, and that is situated in Trinidad. All right. Two activities, right, in which the associate we are actively engaged upon, which can in fact contribute to improve response to hazards, are number one, they simply aid in mobilizing first responders to reach the scene and basically are actively engaged upon the efforts of volunteers to aid in remediation efforts. All right. Secondly, they actually post bulletins and news and highlight certain alerts, right, on social media and news platforms in an attempt to inform citizens, right, of potential threats, of existing or perhaps approaching phenomena. You understand? Okay. And in terms of part two, C part two, explain how three activities in the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, formerly known as CDERA, can reduce the impact of natural hazards in the Caribbean. Now, first and foremost, let us remember that CDEMA is in fact a coordinator, right? They will simply facilitate and coordinate activities. They will be like the command center, the base for all the different response agencies for the entire Caribbean. All right, CARICOM, for instance, will actually be centralized at that particular region in terms of their activities and stuff like that. So they will simply coordinate and facilitate, and they actually encourage the pool efforts of a wide array of different first responders and also provide aid in that regard for especially those nations which may in fact be affected. Secondly, they can also be very pivotal in terms of providing financial relief and aid, all right, especially for those particular countries. They are in fact a significant agency which will simply network with multiple others throughout the Caribbean region. And in doing so, what they do, there will be, like I indicated, there will be a pool effort where even financial aid will be facilitated as well. Right? Apart from manual labor, there will also be financial aid also made in terms of provided for particular affected regions. Last but not least, Sedima is in fact highly operational when it comes to the dissemination of information. All right, if there is in fact one particular region potentially on the verge of being affected, or perhaps multiple regions as a matter of fact, information will be transcended from that particular body to all the different organizations or agencies within the respective countries. All right, and that is actually very, very important. It actually acts as an information body, an information source. All right, and it also acts as a point of dissemination, all right, of vital information, especially to those particular countries which may in fact potentially be affected by any given natural disaster, all right, in a particular region. Okay. All right, let's go through quickly. On the map of the Caribbean, we simply have to show some sites of earthquake activity and volcanic activity in the Caribbean. Name 4 countries, lettered A, B, C, D, and E, all right, from the particular map itself. Let's go through quickly. All right, so this group of islands at country E, all right, is in fact the Bahamas. All right, this one here at country B is Jamaica. All right, C would actually be Martinique. All right, D is in fact the most easterly of the islands, the Caribbean islands, which is in fact Barbados. All right, and we also have E. E is essentially Grenada. All right, we also have F is actually Trinidad and Tobago. So we decided to go through all of them as a matter of fact. All right, let's go through quickly for B, part 1. Define each of the following terms: water pollution and deforestation. Water pollution is in fact a term which refers to the introduction of contaminants or substances, whether it be solid, even liquid, or perhaps even gas, into the waterways, which can eventually compromise um, the constituents. It can affect the constituents, right? It can have a negative impact upon the aesthetics. It can have a negative impact upon human health, and by extension, upon the environmental processes. In terms of deforestation, deforestation is a thing which exemplifies or highlights the physical removal of vegetation, right, from a particular land area. And this is in fact very important because the mechanisms of, well, machinery can be involved, and also influences of fire can be very operational in terms of the process itself. Now, part 2, identify 2 ways by which the atmosphere can be polluted. Okay, the atmosphere can actually be polluted by fossil fuel combustion and also through the release of noxious gases. All right. In terms of identifying one source of each, in terms of the fossil fuel combustion, you can actually have that can actually be derived from either factories or perhaps industries or even vehicle emissions. With respect to the release of noxious gases, even volcanic eruptions can contribute to the production of these particular constituents. All right. Moving in quickly. All right. Explain 3 causes of global warming. Now, in terms of the 3 causes of global warming, we could actually talk about deforestation as being one of the major causes. Because when we remove forests, when we clear forests, when we remove that vegetative structure, we are in fact reducing the amount of oxygen spewed into the atmosphere via photosynthetic processes during the day. And also, we are increasing the amount of carbon dioxide emissions primarily in the atmosphere as well. We could also take in consideration the fact that we have industrial pollution increases in the atmosphere. This is in fact associated with the combustion of fossil fuels, which produce a lot of nitrous oxides, as well as sulfur dioxide in particular, and even carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which can have a negative or a deleterious effect. Thirdly, we have unsustainable agricultural practices such as excessive tillage, and this simply fragment or break apart rocks and eventually reduce the consolidated structure, thereby releasing pockets of air, well, which were once trapped into these rocks, into the atmosphere. So we increase the reserve and the concentration of these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere per se. All right. Right now, with respect to the second part of the question, discuss 2 likely consequences of global warming on the marine environment. Now, folks, when we talk about global warming, we should bear in mind that there would in fact be a warmer sea surface temperature. The first point is that there would in fact be warmer sea surface temperatures, which would in fact increase the degree to which coral degradation, all right, is in fact occurring. So it would in fact promote coral degradation, the warmer sea surface temperatures that is, and as a result, the corals themselves will be subjected to bleaching. And as a result, there can actually be a subsequent decline in the marine biodiversity. All right. Now, secondly, we can actually take in consideration the fact that there's an increased amount of thermal energy that can cause the actual ice sheets, all right, in the surrounding environments, the ice sheets to simply melt, all right, the glaciers to melt. And this can result in an increase in the sea surface levels. All right. And as a result of that, there will be a subsequent increase in erosion, given the fact that you will have a greater volume of water in contact with the actual land itself. All right. Keep that in mind for me, please. All right. And coastal erosion can in fact become much more apparent. Okay, let's go through. With respect to the last question, which is in fact question 10, table 3 shows the area deforested in the Amazon for the years 2004 2007. Now, everybody knows how to construct a bar graph. All right, just remember for me, when you're doing the bar graph, remember for your X and Y axes, you have to number one, label your axes. All right, label it properly. Number two, provide a proper title. Number three, all right, plot your points properly. Number four, maximize the actual graph page on the maximize upon the graph page itself. Number five, make sure you put a proper scale for both X and Y axes. Keep that in mind for me. This is basic form 5, sorry, SEA maths. All right. On the y-axis, you will be putting area deforested per units as well. On the x-axis, you will be putting the independent variable, which is in fact years. All right. Okay, so do that for me when you get some time. That's actually very, very simple. If there's in fact any questions, feel free to let me know. With respect to the part B, describe two forms of pollution produced through agriculture or agro processes. Now, folks, when we are talking about two forms of pollution through agriculture or agro-processing, we must bear in mind number one, all right, air pollution due to an increase in the use of aerosol spraying, especially on large scale or commercial arable farming. All right, in many instances, large expanses of land, very, very large areas, extensive areas, they will utilize planes and crafts simply to spray their crops, all right, using these aerosol sprays as a matter of fact. And that can actually result in atmospheric pollution, and subsequently, the atmospheric fallout would contribute to land or even soil pollution, or in some areas, water pollution. All right. This brings us to the second point. The second point is blatant or direct water pollution from fertilizer runoff. So this is actually direct or indirect with respect to the runoff mechanisms, especially when rain falls. The excesses simply of the chemical fertilizers, that is, can simply be entering the channels or the streams and eventually going to the waterways, entering unwanted areas, thereby contributing to an effect, what you call eutrophication. All right, that is where you can actually have an explosion of algae that can simply outcompete, aquatic plants and their aquatic or even perhaps their marine environments. All right, they can outcompete them. All right. Now, Part C state four specific measures used by individuals in the Caribbean to reduce land pollution. Now, number one, all right, this is in fact question Part C, right? Number one, we can simply say they can in fact be cleanup campaigns to which many volunteers may be actively engaged. Number two, we can simply reduce our consumption. All right, when we reduce our consumption, we simply minimize in terms of the amount of waste, solid waste, which is in fact imposed upon the land. Thirdly, we can simply reuse older materials. All right, instead of throwing them indiscriminately into the waste or the landfill sites, all right, we can simply reuse older materials for some specific purpose. Number four, we can also recycle materials. All right, recycling is a major mechanism which can actually reduce the amount of bulk, all right, from the landfill sites as well. Okay, the last question for the entire paper. Explain how four measures reduce the impact of deforestation, giving specific examples. right, from Caribbean countries. Now, first and foremost, what is in fact done? First and foremost, number one, there can in fact be zoning regulations with respect to building and development. Example, in Trinidad, some areas are in fact non-developmental zones. For instance, we have Chagaramas, that forested area there. No individual is in fact supposed to be properly developing or establishing some level of infrastructure across there unless they are given the approval. Unless the body, which is in fact the Chagaramas Development Authority, provide or grant the approval for that. Nonetheless, it is said to be a non-developmental zone. All right. We also have the Aripo savannas. The Aripo savanna is in fact a protected region for well, a vegetative region within the country itself, and it is, although there can in fact be squatting still taking place, right, it is designated as a non-developmental zone as well. There can also be reforestation projects where the EME can actually host national initiatives, all right, engaging the activities of the volunteers in the nation, of course. And also there can be NGO groups, right, non-governmental organizations. These groups can simply intend to, simply reestablish an area in terms of its vegetative structure and engage in a particular activity. Thirdly, there can also be hefty penalties and fines, all right, with respect to fires and land clearance. For example, in Trinidad, there is a particular fee with respect to that. There were, in fact, subject increases in the potential fees that were associated with the past. However, this still needs a lot more scrutiny with respect to the accountability of such activities. Right, there must be some level of accountability with respect to that, and there must be a significant reduction. All right, these act as deterrents, as a matter of fact. We can also have aerial and land monitoring, as well as mobilizing forest units and their officers, forest officers, sorry, and their units rather, and also educating the public as to the importance of conservation. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago Forestry Division, there is in fact departments like FRIM and FIU, which simply provide information, and they simply go to schools as well, educating the students with respect to the importance of conservation and stuff like that, and the importance of trees and vegetative cover to any given environment. All right, so I hope this was actually very beneficial to you all. You will see a lot of these questions being repeated as time progress. All right, so any questions, feel free to let me know. You all keep good. All right, bye.